Well, Gonzaga made LMU look like an easy victory the last time out. Can they do it again, or will a lengthy Kentucky hangover have them on upset watch?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more, folks. Right now, new customers who join today, you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more is a win. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. We're going to take a look ahead at the week coming up for Lisa Fortier's team, talk a little bit about Yvonne Ejim getting named to another award watch list. We also got a discussion on Gonzaga's net ranking and how it's being altered by the teams they have played this year, who we should be rooting for, who we should maybe not be rooting for, what that looks like at this point right now. But first, we got to get you ready for tonight's battle between Gonzaga and LMU on the road in Malibu, February 15th, 6 p.m. Pacific time. This game will be broadcast on the CBS Sports Network. I know some people had trouble finding the CBS Sports Network last week. I have Fubo. Fubo does have CBS Sports Network for those looking for maybe a 7-day trial of that. Hopefully it's a game that people can find. I know it's difficult when these games are not always on ESPN, ESPN2, or the easier places to find the games. Zags obliterated LMU the last time these two teams played. It was, at the time, considered Gonzaga's best overall win of the season. Probably still their most dominant performance. They also were similarly dominant against the University of Portland exactly 1 week later. And then, of course, they beat Kentucky, which is the best game of the year, hands down, in terms of the importance of said victory, their only quad one win of the year, et cetera, et cetera. But certainly that LMU game really felt like a big turning point for Gonzaga. It was kind of coming off of the sloppy performance against San Francisco, particularly at the end of the game where they nearly lost that one, coming off of that sloppy performance against Pacific, where it never really felt like they were in super danger of losing, at least not in the second half, but they did not play well in that game at all. And then they come out and they destroy LMU. Dominick Harris was unable to get anything going as LMU's leading scorer in that one. Turnover machine for all of LMU that game. And Gonzaga really rode that momentum. They did lose to St. Mary's in the next game, but they turned around and beat Portland, turned around and beat Kentucky. Meanwhile, while Gonzaga has played 3 or 4 of their best games, even the St. Mary's game was a loss, but it was a quality performance by them for the most part. Gonzaga has been playing some of their best basketball since that LMU game, and the same cannot be said for LMU. These two teams have kind of started going in the opposite direction. LMU is 0-2 since that loss to Gonzaga. They lost at San Diego by 2, 79-77. They also lost at home against Pepperdine, 72-63 was the final score there. And part of the issue for them has been the absence of Dominick Harris. Harris played only 14 minutes against San Diego, sat in the second half with an injury. He did not play at all against Pepperdine. As I'm recording this right now, there is not an update about whether Dom will suit up against Gonzaga on Thursday. I hope that he does. Sincerely hope that he does. I think everybody does. I don't think any of us want to see Dom not playing in that game. It's him at home against his former school. It's a good narrative story. He did not play well the last time out. And while I wouldn't say we're rooting for him to have a great game necessarily, for him to get some redemption and have a good solid performance would be, I think, a good feeling for him. And I think it would just be a nice story for him. Having said all of that, we at least want him to play. We at least want him to play. It would be unfortunate if he didn't get the opportunity to play in this game because of an injury. It's never fun when players have to miss games because of injury. It's never fun when you have to miss a game against Gonzaga. In general, all players want to play against Gonzaga. Tyler Harris, freshman at Portland, I'm sure he was devastated he didn't get a chance to play against Gonzaga. But for Dom, it obviously means more. So hopefully whatever is, I think it's a knee injury, whatever's ailing him right now, he'll be able to get right in time to play tonight against the Zags. But LMU struggling on the season, not just the last couple of games, 10-14 on the year. They're just 3-7 in the WCC. They got a half-game lead on Pepperdine and Portland, and that's it. The only other team below them is Pacific. They are a half game out of being in 8th place out of 9 teams in the WCC. This is not the expectation for LMU, and they lost a ton of talent from last year's team. It was difficult. Carlos Stewart transferred. Cam Shelton graduated. They had a lot of players they had to replace. They added some key pieces in the transfer portal, including Dom, of course, and they just haven't quite put it all together. And I think it's a tough coaching job to have literally an entirely new backcourt. They had Dom coming off the bench before they brought him into the starting lineup. I think they were just trying to figure things out, but we're now this far into the season and they still haven't quite got things figured out. So it's been a disappointing year for LMU, but for Gonzaga, the story for this game, and I will give my 5 keys as I typically do here, it's really going to be about, which is key number 1 here, you got to keep the momentum going, or really not let the gap and the kind of the gap in days between the Kentucky game on Saturday and now this game on Thursday. You can't let the gap bother you, and you also can't let the fact that this is a pretty big come down in terms of opponent, in terms of energy in the building, just the energy, the feeling of how we need to win this game against Kentucky. It's a quad 1 game. It's this really big, boisterous environment. This is going to be a lot less than that. It's going to be significantly not that, is the best way to put it. Gonzaga needs to avoid letting that impact them in any way, shape, or form. You have to keep that momentum going. I talked about this on a recent show. I think it was Mailbag Monday. People said, we're asking about like, how can this Kentucky win carry some momentum for Gonzaga? The answer is yes, but it's hard to come off of that game and have your next 2 games be at LMU and at Pacific. I think it's a home game against Pacific, regardless, Pacific in general. Those 2 teams are not very good. You beat LMU very badly last time. The combination of coming off this big emotional win where you're feeling great, you're feeling, like you finally turned things around, this just emotional high, and then going into a team that you already beat very badly. 92-58 was the final score that last time these 2 teams played. And you just took care of them in every aspect of the game. You turned them over. You shot really well. They shot really poorly. It was just an absolute dominating effort from Gonzaga. The combination of those 2 things can make this a tricky game. Not to mention you're going on the road in back-to-back games. It can be tricky. The Dominick Harris situation absolutely plays a role into this, and hopefully if he does play, that helps energize Gonzaga a little bit, and they don't overlook this game. They don't kind of have that hangover that we see so many teams suffer after beating a big team, a good team. But I think that's the biggest key. No sluggishness. LMU slows the pace down. If they can avoid turnovers and they can slow Gonzaga down, and Gonzaga's a little sluggish because of all of those aforementioned factors, there's a recipe to LMU pulling off an absolute stunner here. Remember, Gonzaga beat them by 40+ last year and lost the other game. It is not out of the question that it could happen again. Key number 2, we just touched on it. Force all those turnovers. LMU turned it over 20 times last time. Gonzaga just turned it over 5 times. LMU looked completely out of sorts. I doubt they're going to look that flummoxed this time out. But if they don't have Dom, they're going to be missing one of their best players, their leading scorer. And for Gonzaga, instead of being a little bit more passive and just letting them hand you the ball, which is effectively what happened last time, go get the basketball, trap them, force them into turnovers, get out in transition. That's the easiest way to avoid a hangover. That's the easiest way to quiet an away crowd. That's the easiest way to avoid letting another team dictate the pace. If Gonzaga can do all those things, shouldn't be a problem in this one. Key number 3, let's have another great one from Nolan Hickman. 24 points on 10 of 15 shooting last time out, 4 of 7 from 3. You could tell he wanted to show out in the home crowd. He knew Dom returning. He knew there was some extra energy, some fire there, and he wanted to ball out, and he did it. Let's do it again. Whether Dom plays or not, go do it again. Go remind everybody who you are, why Mark Few believed in you, why you are the starting guard on this team. He's been playing great basketball as of late. Another perfect opportunity for him to expose this team in the pick and roll, get his actions going towards the basket, and have another 20-point performance. Key number 4, continuing to build confidence for Braden Huff and Dusty Stromer. Braden may not need it. He built a whole bunch of confidence with his awesome performance against Kentucky on Saturday. He looked great offensively, still some issues defensively, but he's a freshman. That's acceptable. That's understandable. But his offensive performance in that game was critical, massive. Continuing to build that momentum. Have a great game here on the road. Back-to-back road games for Braden Huff and Dusty Stromer. Those guys have struggled a little bit on the road. This is a big opportunity for him to prove that he can bring it night in and night out. For Dusty, 8.7 boards against UP. That was fantastic. Last time he played LMU, 2 points and 4 boards. Didn't do much against Kentucky. We're not super shocked by that. They ran with Ben Gregg in a big way in that game, and I think that was the right decision. But this is a good get-right game for Dusty. A good opportunity for him to flash what we know he's capable of doing, have a bigger offensive game, get some steals, get some blocks. He had 2 of each last time these two teams played, and really kind of continue to prove that he can be a vital piece, not only next year, but towards as we get into the March in the NCAA tournament this year for Gonzaga as well. And then key number 5, empty the bench. Would love to see some Junsook Yo in this game. We haven't seen much of him lately. Love to see some Luka Krajinovic. We've seen quite a bit of him lately, but I think he could have a big role in this game, especially if Gonzaga can build a tidy lead in this one. And let's see the walk-ons. Let's see Pavle Stosic. Let's see Colby Brooks, Joe Few. Why not, right? Let's see some of those guys get a chance to play because we didn't get to see it against Kentucky, but they should get opportunities both tonight and on Saturday against Pacific. Well, Syracuse got themselves a big, huge win over North Carolina on Tuesday. UCLA has now won 5 games in a row, and Yale is undefeated in the Ivy League. What does it all mean for Gonzaga? More on that coming up after a word from today's sponsor, FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA and college players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. I'll continue to say it, Gonzaga women 240-1 odds. That is a fantastic bet to win the national championship. I know it seems hard to imagine they could do it, but folks, $5 nets you $1,200. If Yvonne Ejim, Lisa Fortier, and the Lady Zags can pull off a stunner, they're looking like a top 3, top 4 seed. I am perfectly willing to make that bet. If you want to join me, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, folks, segment 2 here. Still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Switching over from getting you ready for that game tonight against the Lions of LMU to talk a little bit more about the net rankings. It's a topic that's been a topic on the show much more than typical, in part because Gonzaga's spot in the NCAA tournament is not nearly as secure as it has been in the past, and folks are starting to wonder, like, what does this mean? What does our ranking mean? What is the likelihood that if we finish with this ranking, we're still going to make the NCAA tournament? Why does it fluctuate so much on days we don't even play? And there's a lot that goes into the net ranking, but effectively, every team that Gonzaga plays, the better they do, the more likely it helps Gonzaga's resume. Whether they beat that team or not, it helps them. So the net sets you up to want to root for the teams that you have already beat so that they can move into a higher quadrant so that makes you look better. You want losses to move up. You'd rather have a quad 2 loss than a quad 3 loss. Obviously, with wins, you'd rather have a quad 1 win than a quad 2 win. That's what makes it kind of a unique setup. And also, it's not perfect. I'm not going to pretend that it's perfect. I don't think anybody's going to pretend that it is perfect, but it is the best that we have right now. And it is valuable in terms of how the committee chooses teams on Selection Sunday. So if Gonzaga does not win the WCC tournament, if they do not beat St. Mary's in that championship in Las Vegas, where they are in the net is going to factor in. Currently, as this is being recorded on Wednesday and it updates every day, so it is probably slightly different, Gonzaga's 23rd in the net. No team has ever missed the NCAA tournament as an at-large bid under 31. Now, the net has not been around for very long, so that stat doesn't mean that much to me. If Gonzaga's 29th, I don't think we're going to say, well, we're clearly in, because it doesn't matter to me. If it had been around for 75 years and that was the number, then yeah, I'd probably feel a little bit more confident, but it hadn't been around that long. Having said that, Gonzaga's in a decent spot. They are 1-5 in quad 1 games. That is the big issue for them. But last week it was 0-5. The fact that they beat Kentucky helps in a big way. 1-5 in quad 1, 2-1 in quad 2, 5-0 in quad 3, and then 9-0 in those quad 4 games. And obviously for Gonzaga, the big things coming up are those road game at San Francisco, the road game at St. Mary's, however they do in the WCC tournament. Those are the games that matter. You can't lose your quad 4 games. You can't lose to Portland. You can't lose to Pacific. You can't lose to LMU. Those are all very important games for Gonzaga to pick up as well. But really, they need to win those games that are going to boost that quad 1 resume. However, there are other things that could change that Gonzaga has no control over. Nothing they can do about it. Some of them could change in a positive way. Some of them maybe not so much in a positive way. And I want to talk about which games might move around in Gonzaga's net rankings and what that could mean for them. Here are a couple positive changes that could happen and who we need to be rooting for. Both USC and UCLA are currently quad 3 victories for Gonzaga. That is a tragedy that both those programs have dropped so far that they were considered two of Gonzaga's better non-conference games, and they're currently quad 3 victories. Since they were both on the neutral site, in order to become a quad 2 game, either USC or UCLA, or both of them, need to be in the top 100. If they are top 100 teams in the net, that would make that game as a neutral site game a quad 2 victory for Gonzaga. Currently, again, as of Wednesday, February 14th, USC is 109th in the net and UCLA is 111th. They're very close. Very, very close. UCLA has been on a nice winning streak. They got Colorado and Utah at home this week. Then they play USC. USC, they also have Colorado and Utah at home this week. Obviously flipped. They're playing Utah, then Colorado, then they'll play UCLA. Would be a huge weekend for Gonzaga. If the LA schools could beat up on Colorado and Utah at home, be a bad week for those programs who both have at-large aspirations. But if UCLA and USC can beat those two teams, one of them will have to lose to each other. But that could conceivably move both these programs into the top 100, or at least close to it. For Gonzaga, even just one of them would be helpful. The difference between 2-1 and 3-1 in quad 2 maybe doesn't feel huge, but it doesn't hurt either. It doesn't hurt either. So those are two teams, not that we are super comfortable rooting for USC and UCLA, but those are two teams that we are rooting for right now to get into the top 100 of the net. We're also rooting for Yale. Yale out of the Ivy League, they are perfect in Ivy League play right now, 7-0. They are 83rd in the net. Because that was a home game for Gonzaga, they need to be in the top 100 for it to become a quad 2, or excuse me, they need to be in the top 75, let me get that correct, for it to become a quad 2 game. They need to be in the top 30 for it to become quad 1. That's not going to happen. Yale's not moving up 50-plus spots. But if they can move from 83rd to 75th, not a huge jump, that quad 3 victory for Gonzaga becomes a quad 2 victory. They're 7-0 in the Ivy League. They have their upcoming games are at Princeton and at Cornell. They also have Penn in there, but at Princeton and at Cornell are the important ones. At Princeton's a quad 1 game. At Cornell's a quad 2 game. Both those teams are the top 2 teams in the Ivy League outside of Yale. If Yale can win those 2 games, they are very likely going to become a top 75 team. Very likely then certainly would become a quad 2 game. So we're talking about Gonzaga 2-1 in quad 1 right now and 5-0 in quad 3. It is not crazy that in the next 2 weeks they could be 5-1 in quad 2. And only 2-0 in quad 3 games. That's a big difference. I don't know how much it'll move them up in the net rankings necessarily. It certainly depends on how the teams around them do, but that's a big difference. 1-5 in quad 1 and 2-1 in quad 2 doesn't look that great. 1-5 in quad 1 and 5-1 in quad 2 looks a lot better. It looks a lot better. The other one that people are talking about a lot right now, especially after their win over North Carolina, is Syracuse. Syracuse could conceivably move from a quad 2-1 to a quad 1 win. That would be huge. Obviously, another quad 1 victory being handed to Gonzaga would be a monster gift at this point in the season, although it's not that likely. Syracuse is 85th in the net right now. This is after they beat North Carolina. They've moved up to 85th. They would need to be top 50 for it to be a quad 1 win. That's a big jump. Syracuse also has a pretty easy schedule the rest of the way. They only have one quad 1 game left. That's at Clemson. It's their final regular season game of the year. That's it. It's only quad 1 game. They got Louisville, they got Notre Dame, they got Georgia Tech, they got Virginia Tech, they got NC State. None of those teams are very good. The ACC is not very good. That's part of the problem for Syracuse. It's part of the problem for teams like Miami and Wake Forest who are trying to compete for at-large bids. They don't have a lot of big opportunities to pick them up. But for Syracuse, the odds of them moving from 85 to 50, pretty slim. Pretty slim. Would be great. Happy to root for the Orange, but I just don't think that's going to happen. There are a couple not so good things that could potentially happen as well. The main one to keep an eye on is Washington. They are currently a quad 1 loss for Gonzaga. That could become a quad 2 loss. They're 68th in the net as we're recording right now. If they drop below 75, that would become a quad 2 loss for Gonzaga. So we really want those USC, UCLA, and Yale wins to move into the quad 2 because there is a chance that Gonzaga will end up having a second quad 2 loss. It makes their quad 1 record look a little better. Frankly, it goes from 1-5 to 1-4. It's not actually that terrible of a thing, but you don't want another quad 2 loss on the resume either. So we got to root for UW. They got Stanford and Cal at home. They got to pick up both of those games. Those are two teams that UW has to be better than. They have to win at home in those two games. It is imperative. If they drop either of those games, there's a real chance they're outside of the top 75. We also got to root for San Francisco in a big way, because the win right now is a quad 2 win. It could become a quad 3 win at home. USF 66th in the net. They need to stay in the top 75 for that win to stay a quad 2 win. Beyond that, more importantly, they need to stay in the top 75 because Gonzaga's upcoming game against San Francisco is considered a true road game, even though it is at the Chase Center, which means it is a quad 1 game as long as San Francisco remains in the top 75. If USF drops out of the top 75, their quad 2 win becomes a quad 3 win. And if they beat them on the road, if Gonzaga wins on the road, that would become a quad 2 win instead of a quad 1 win. It is very important that San Francisco stay in the top 75, which means we want them to beat every single team they play except for Gonzaga. We want them to beat St. Mary's. They certainly cannot lose to anybody else in the conference. A lot of Gonzaga's resume right now rides on San Francisco staying in the top 75. That is a very, very critical thing. Pepperdine could become a quad 4 win instead of a quad 3 win. Frankly, it just doesn't matter all that much. Once you get into that level, just as long as you don't have any losses in quad 3, quad 4, it doesn't really matter. They're 233rd in the net. If they drop below 240, it becomes a quad 4 win. Again, not really overly concerned about that, just pointing it out that is another thing that could shift on Gonzaga's quad resume without them having to do anything. Well, Yvonne Ejim is back after her trip with Canada to go get themselves a spot solidified in the 2024 Paris Olympic Games. She's also up for a major college basketball award, and we're going to talk more about her return and the women's weekend schedule coming up after a word from today's sponsor, Game Time. Sometimes family events are best when they are planned on the spur of the moment, and for that you need Game Time. Because Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sporting events, as well as music, comedy, and theater near you. And with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. We're a little under a month away right now from the WCC tournament, and Game Time is a great place to get tickets. If you're just wanting to go for a day or two, Game Time is the perfect spot for that type of event. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. And right now, new Game Time users who use code LOCKEDON will get $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, closing out today's show, talking about Lisa Fortier and Gonzaga women's basketball program. First, we're going to talk about Yvonne Ejim. We talked about her on Tuesday's show. So for those of you who listened to Tuesday's show, I don't want to repeat too much of what we talked about, but Yvonne missed Gonzaga's last 2 games because she was traveling to Hungary with Team Canada, the senior women's national team, to help them qualify for the 2024 Paris Olympic Games. Canada didn't do great. They went 1-2, and they needed Spain to upset Hungary in order to actually qualify. 3 of the 4 teams were going to qualify for the Olympics. Hungary, the host, was actually the team that did not qualify, unfortunately for them. But fortunately for Canada, they were able to qualify in part because of Yvonne. She didn't play much, but that's okay. College students typically don't play much for their senior national team. The fact that she's even on the roster is an incredible testament to her skills. Meanwhile, back on the ranch, back at home for the Gonzaga women's team, they didn't struggle whatsoever without Yvonne in the mix. They beat Pepperdine by 37 points. They beat LMU by 24 points. As a quick reminder, the closest margin of victory for the Gonzaga women's team in conference play this year is 18 points. 9 of their 11 wins have been by 20 or more. 4 of their 11 wins have been by 35 or more points. Just a ridiculous level of dominance for Lisa Fortier's team this year. And while we kind of joke that Ejim they didn't need her in those games, and clearly they did not based on the result, that does not mean that she has not been one of the most valuable players in all of college basketball. And in fact, the Naismith Trophy Player of the Year releases a 30-player midseason team. They have a 50-player watch list before the season starts. They release a 30-player midseason watch list, midseason team, and then they, of course, will pick the Naismith Player of the Year during the NCAA tournament. I think they pick it around the Final Four. Yvonne has been named to one of the 30 players named to the Naismith Player of the Year midseason team. This is a tremendous accomplishment and a completely deserved accomplishment. 20.3 points per game, 8.3 rebounds. She has 209 made field goals. That is 3rd in the country. She has 487 total points. That is 6th in the entire country. She has scored in double figures in 30 consecutive games. That is a ridiculous, marvelous statistic from Yvonne. She is so unbelievably consistent at getting her buckets, getting her points, and contributing in a meaningful way offensively, and this year in particular defensively for this program. Her 65.4% field goal percentage is 6th in the entire country. And look, here's the deal. Caitlin Clark's going to win this award. There's not any mystery here. Angel Reese is fantastic. Paige Beckers is fantastic. Cameron Spink. There's a ton of incredibly talented women's basketball players. Women's college basketball is at an absolute peak in terms of popularity, in terms of personality, in terms of just level of play. It's extraordinary. And the fact that there is so many high-level talents, not just Caitlin Clark. She's getting a lot of the attention, and deservedly so. She's unbelievably incredible. But there's more than just her and what she's bringing to women's basketball, to Iowa, to the Big Ten. There's more than that. But the fact that Yvonne gets on this list when the talent level is as high as it is in women's basketball is an incredible testament to how good she has been, to how great Gonzaga has been, and that she is getting that recognition. People are noticing. It's taken a little longer, and I still think the AP poll and other places haven't really recognized Gonzaga as being as good as I think that they actually are, but they are recognizing Yvonne at least. And that is huge because she 100% deserves to be in this conversation. She is clearly a top 30 player in women's basketball. She's probably a top 15 player. Maybe top 10. That's tough. But she should be an All-American. At the very minimum, she should be an honorable mention All-American, third-team All-American, at minimum. Hopefully she gets that recognition at the end of the year. Ladies, I've got 2 games this week. They're playing St. Mary's and Pacific, both on the road. 2 games that, frankly, shouldn't be a huge challenge for the women's team. They haven't been particularly challenged in the WCC at all this year. The last time they played these 2 teams, they beat St. Mary's by 29 points at home, and Pacific, we remember that game. 104-39 was the final score the last time these 2 teams played. They won by 65 points. St. Mary's 199th in the net ranking. They're 9-14 on the year. Pacific 157th in the net. That's 4th in the WCC. They're 12-10 on the year. As a reminder, Kentucky, Pitt, New Mexico, Wake Forest, all teams that are around or behind Pacific in the net rankings. So we're talking about a team that is on par with, admittedly not very good, Power 6 programs, but Power 6 programs. Gonzaga beat them by 65 points. I will continue to reiterate the ridiculousness of that result when it happened 2 or so weeks ago. So Gonzaga's got chances to play 2 teams that they've already handled quite significantly. Again, for them at this point, it's all about just maintaining, continuing to not have any of those lulls, not have any of those hangovers. Bring Yvonne back into the mix and go get 2 more really big-time victories. Pad your resume, pad her stats, and continue to power through as they get into March. It's going to wrap it up for us today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. And shout out to those everyday listeners. Shout out to those of you hanging out in the Discord channel. Over 300 folks talking Zags hoops 24/7. We're going to have a big old game thread to talk about this game tonight against LMU. Join if you haven't done so yet. It is free. There's a link in the show notes on audio and video platforms. We'll be back on Friday recapping this game, getting y'all ready for Gonzaga's game against Pacific over the weekend. Until then, though, as always, go Zags.